I'm really happy to welcome Mr. Mikael Laakso. He is Associate Professor at Anken School of Economics, Helsinki, in Helsinki, Finland. He has been researching the changing landscape towards openness in scholarly publishing by studying combinations of bibliometrics, web metrics, business models, science policy, and author behavior for over 10 years. And as Jean-Claude Guédon in his presentation mentioned Mikael quite a few times, so I think the transition is really good, and so we are happy to listen to Mikael.
Yes, thank you very much, Gail, for the lovely introduction. And first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me here. I'm very honored and happy to share some of my old and new research about what's going on with regards to open access development. The slides look a bit different than when I sent them in. There is a URL on the first slide if you want to download them. I don't know if they will be shared, but they are available somewhere on the web if you Google creatively. But my talk for today is split basically into two parts. I want to provide you a kind of a bird's eye view on how open access publishing in journals has evolved during the period of 2010 to 2016. And then the second part, or kind of complementary part to that, would be to really talk about how ROAD has a very large potential to enhance future studies on open access development. So two parts, and that's kind of the main message I want you to leave with, and knowledge. We could progress to the next slide. You already heard some of my background, but just to declare my vested interests, I'm a researcher, teacher by day, and then by night I emerge into some kind of open access activist or policy informing person that is involved with trying to further and advocate open access publishing through cost-effective and best means, thinking about involved stakeholders. So the problem of openness can be solved by using money and lots of it, but that isn't really the optimal solution. And I think I already started some of my discussion in my doctoral thesis, which is already a couple of years old now, where I conducted in collaboration with other authors or researchers at Hanken different types of studies looking at how open access and particularly business models and author behavior have changed over time. So there's a lot to take in here, and this presentation is also meant to give you a primer to understand the daily challenges of measuring open access and just understanding how difficult it is to get a good comprehension of what's really going on. What is the current status of open access when it comes to journal publishing, because it could probably be the subject of 10 more doctoral dissertations about just the methodological difficulties in getting accurate and standardized measurements of something that's constantly moving. Yes. So Jean-Claude already gave good background, very good background and definitions, but just to make this presentation independent as well, we could move to the next slide to really highlight that open access is basically, it can mean many different things depending on how you interpret it, but the basic idea is conveyed by Peter Suber in his book titled Open Access, that it's literature that is digital, online, and free for readers to access, and often with kind of liberal licenses attached. And for my kind of talk today, I will focus on this gold open access part. So open access provided directly by journals. Green open access, i.e. Authors or other individuals uploading manuscripts on the web, is interesting and very relevant. But I think for the focus of the ISSN organization and just for understanding how the field of publishing moves, I think it's worthwhile to spend this little moment I have thinking really about how journal publishing models have changed. Yes. And this is more of a summary of what Jean-Claude already presented earlier, that open access has been constantly moving and is malleable to many different strong forces that have been present for longer than the internet, but even and through the advent of internet technologies, standardized PDF documents, web standards, it's really become very technically simple to provide open scholarly content on the web, but there are many other obstacles in the way of really flipping or transitioning to a fully open scholarly system. And all of these forces have changed over time. You know, the shift towards a more gold open access policy or green open access policy seem to change as the wind changes, and as, you know, national policies get refined and developed, we go in either direction depending on which country or part of the world or segment of the publishing industry or sector that we're looking at. But just to highlight that there are many moving parts in this system, and it is possible to change it by being knowledgeable of the forces that shape open access, and in particularly in later years, and in particularly in Europe, this science policy component has become very strong in research funders and national ministries getting involved in laying down mandates for enforcing open access through different means. But enough about history. Let's start to look into how to make you into knowledgeable experts on the benefits and drawbacks of different open access measurements. So I will use the knowledge that you gain now to kind of help you interpret the landscape, but the three basic things that anyone with an interest in open access measurements need to kind of figure out is basically what is considered open access. What is the definition? There are many elements to this. Then we need to figure out if we want to do a snapshot study. Do we just want to paint the landscape as it exists today, or do we want to look backwards and see how things have emerged to the state they are today? That's a very fundamental philosophical question. And then the third question, and that's where we then go into road and the potential of it in what is the population? What is the universe of journals that we're looking at if we want to come up with percentages of open access this and delayed that? And, you know, there's many different categorizations we can pick up here. But the basic gist of it is that there's very little standardization when it comes to all of these things regarding open access measurement. So it's very hard to compare a study done 5 years ago to one done today when all of these moving parts are different. And the World Wide Web is changing day by day, as do journals, flipping back and forth between publishing models. So it's a very complex system, but I think knowing about these three things will make you ready to do your own open access studies if you so want. But we could start with the first component, and we can move straight into the actual beef of this argument. Is open access can be broken down, even the gold component, into many different categories. And I think even though this looks horrible on a big screen with minimal font and many different categorizations on a scale, I think this open access spectrum that has been produced in collaboration by PLOS, Spark, and OASPA is a very good tool to kind of gauge the different elements of openness when it comes to how a journal is open to the world. So here we have a scale for reader rights, a scale for reuse rights, copyrights, author posting rights, automatic posting done by the journal into different repositories, and then machine readability. How open is the journal to being machine readable? And this is not only, I think, useful for understanding where roughly different journals might place on this scale of openness, but it's also useful for research, providing a standardized scheme through which you can benchmark journals or a bunch of different journals to see how they kind of score on this type of a scoring sheet. And actually, I haven't done a lot of research on this myself, but I was involved in one study where we looked at all scholarly journals active in Spain and benchmarking them against the four first from the left-hand side, leaving out automatic posting and machine readability, giving numeric scores to journals and see how the landscape of journals being published in Spain kind of map out on this kind of landscape of variables. So it's very useful both for research, but I think even having this as some kind of a legend for yourself to see, you know, what are the elements of open access that are changeable and variable when we look at different sources. I think this is a great tool. And there's both a website on Spark and then an article that talks more about the background and practical application of it that I recommend looking up. I have the references at the end of the slides as well, so you don't need to make notes. But we could move forward to the next step of your learning journey. So snapshots, studies, or a longitudinal. I promised you a longitudinal study when you came here today, from 2010 to 2016, so I kind of have to hold my promise in some way, but I also have to mention some caveats in doing these retrospective studies when you look on the World Wide Web. Could move on to the next. So either you open your web browser and pick up a figurative camera and kind of take a snapshot of the world as it exists today. What is the percentage of research published 5 years ago that is available on the web today, and draw some conclusions from that. Or you can try to be one step ahead, or shall we say one step behind, trying to create some kind of a time machine to move back in time to see what was the status of open access in 2010. Because the memory of the web is very short, the scholarly publishing landscapes moves fast, and even the best indexes are bad at tracking changes. So tracking changes in going from closed to open or open to closed, creation of new journals, discontinuing of journals. So it's really hard to get a time series of scholarly publishing. So it's very hard to avoid doing just a snapshot study. It's not even easy to do a full comprehensive photograph of the internet where everything fits into the frame, but rather I have attempted building some kind of a time machine mechanism to emulate how the web looked like in 2010. But enough promises that might not be fulfilled. We could move to the next slide. What journals to study as your population? So you all know the universe of ISSN and ROAD. Those are the most expansive, as I see it, indexes of listings of different publication channels. But for people interested in scientometrics and getting detailed information about article numbers, and more metadata about the journals concerning publishing models, for example, it becomes hard to only use one index as a source of knowledge. And that's why any researcher or anyone interpreting a study about open access needs to know what are the general strengths and drawbacks of a study done on, for example, only the Web of Science or only the directory of open access journals, because all of these have different biases when it comes to international comprehensiveness, like which types of languages or national journals are included in them, and also biases towards openness, in the sense that some indexes, for example, the DOAJ, of course, contains only open access journals. So it's hard to then benchmark the growth of open access in comparison to something else when the same index doesn't really cover those on the same criteria. So this is a real head scratcher and something I don't have ready answers for, but I think ROAD, and we'll go into how that fits into the picture, is a good and underutilized resource for this. But basically, it's only ROAD, DOAJ, and Crossref with its DOI interface that are free for researchers and are open to doing replicable studies. There are good indexes in many ways, like Scopus and Web of Science and Ulrich Web. There are many more, but those are closed, subscription-based services that are problematic for measuring openness. So I think the major promise for following up how open access develops is in these open interfaces and open indexes. Yes, we could move on. So now, time to use the knowledge you've gained about these 3 steps to understanding open access studies, to understand this yet unpublished study, which is near to be kind of submitted for publication, about how journal publishing has evolved from 2010 to 2016. And we could move on to the next slide, where the idea was to benchmark against subscription journals. And that's where me and Bo Christer Björk, my dear collaborator, tried to incorporate as many open access journals as possible in the Scopus index, to kind of try to identify as many open publication channels there are in Scopus. They are bad at tracking them themselves. the DOAJ isn't perfect at tracking open access journals in Scopus when you cross-match them, but that's where Rode comes to the rescue with providing over 1,000 hits on the Scopus database that are open access channels but aren't flagged as such anywhere else. So I know this is getting a little deep, a little too fast, but the idea is to show that there is overlap in these indexes, and that overlap is both good and can be helpful for maximizing just the journal count and following up how open access develops. So no index is perfect in itself, but basically this kind of analysis where we looked at the overlap between DOAJ, Scopus, and Rode netted us around 4,000 journals. We could move on. So about the time machine. So no index really keeps track of historical development, and that's why I, so to say, spent last summer going through these journals one by one, looking at when they had been created and figuring out when they had flipped to open access, if they had done so. Kind of verifying that they are open, and also verifying or trying to estimate the year that they changed their publishing model if they came from a subscription past. And it was quite a lot of detective work, and while I still was spending my summer looking at journal website, I might as well also collect APC information. You know, it's the least I can do since I already committed to doing this. So collecting the most recent APC information available and determining a flip year or a born open access year for every journal, this hopefully would equip me with the tools to draw up longitudinal analysis which would accommodate for journal flips. So not overcounting journals which have only started publishing open access yesterday as doing so 7 years ago. Okay, and the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine is my newfound love. It's very comprehensive in mapping snapshots of journal websites, and it's a great tool for doing studies like this. Okay, we can move on to the next step of our journey. So this is the first kind of result from the study. When did open access journals indexed in Scopus start open access publishing, and how did they do so? And here, the main gist of it is that most journals that started open access publishing even before the year 2000 came from a conversion past. They were subscription journals before and flipped even before the year 2000. But then we can see that the rate at which journals have converted to open access is fairly stable. Of course, slight increases here and there, but in particularly journals which are created open access from the start, born open access journals, really hit their stride in 2008, 2009, being the kind of golden years of creating new open access outlets. You shouldn't really put too much focus on the last 2-3 years here, because Scopus indexing is a bit lagging. They require journals to have been active for some time to be added to the index. But I think the main idea here is to show you that a lot of journals converted early, and the boom of open access publishing through new journals happened, slightly before the year 2010. Yes. Thanks. And this is maybe one of the main kind of summaries here. Looking at the volume of articles published through different open access mechanisms. And Jean-Claude already gave us a good definition of APCs, megajournals, hybrid open access, so I won't reiterate these facts. But we can see here that there's, of course, been growth. Like these have been growing, and we can already here start to see that the part that has been growing the most is journals that ask authors for payment or have some kind of an author side funding scheme implemented. But also, of course, hybrid open access, though still marginal in 2016, has kind of grown percentage-wise quite a lot, as have megajournals. But the main takeaway here is to show that APC journals are really what in Scopus have contributed to a lot of the bulk of growth. Yes. And here we can see the pricing for converted journals and then journals which have been born open access. And these are calculated based on article counts. So how many journals within pricing of $1 to $200 published in 2016 versus then $4,000. So the spectrum is very wide, but even here we can see that free journals are present, even in Scopus, which has this Western skew and skew towards different parts of the world and different has various selection criteria. But even here we can see that there is a substantial component of free journals, most of them coming from a converted past, so to say. They are usually society sponsored or have some other funding mechanism supporting them rather than asking authors for payment. But then we can see that the hump and kind of the clustering of APC fees when it comes to journals is around $1,500. And of course, the mega journals contribute a lot of article volume there, but that's roughly where, you know, the standard price lies for most of the articles published with an APC. So above $1,000. Yes. Thank you. And then we can start to look at publisher types. Here I just did a rough categorization into three. So university, department, research institute, a scientific society or professional association, or then a commercial professional publisher. So a division into three, quick and dirty, but still kind of useful for showing again where the growth in articles comes from. And here we can see that the light blue line, again, the commercial professional publishers that ask for author side payment are really the kind of those who publish the most articles for each and every year here as the singular category. And in particularly in 2016, that part was substantial. So over half of the articles published were by commercial or professional publishers asking authors for an APC. Yes, thank you. And then, am I going too fast? Please stop me if I do, but we're reaching some kind of culmination here. And this is to show you a cumulative chart of how journals have either converted or being born open access just based on journal counts. Previously, I focused quite a lot on articles and showing you the article volumes. But since we are here at the ISSN, the journal level is also relevant to look at how these over 4,000 journals have come into being as open access journals over time. And here we can see, I think, an interesting observation in that these are abbreviated here on the right-hand side, but these university or research group operated journals, you know, so-called independent journals, I would say, or university presses, have been very good at converting their journals. And they are kind of neck and neck with the commercial ones on some criteria when it comes to journal counts. But if we move to the next slide and look at the same thing article-wise, we can see that the university journals and the small research group journals aren't contributing with as much articles as the commercial giants do with their both converted journals and born open access journals. But I think that's enough stats for one afternoon or morning, sorry. We could move to the next slide and start to think about what this all means for the disciplines. So moving away from all of these growth patterns, just the percentages. This is, again, microscopically small, but it didn't really get better with doing it as a chart in any way. There's too much stuff happening here. But based on the 27 discipline categories present in Scopus, we can again see the thing that many people have seen before, that research disciplines vary a lot when it comes to how open access journals have become established. And there seems to be kind of a gap here in that life sciences, health sciences have above 20% open access articles, while then the social sciences and physical sciences are around 10 or slightly above. So there is this kind of division between disciplines that have a stronger established open access journal presence and those which still are kind of figuring out how to really integrate that into the journal landscape. Yes. But this was only one variation of these three criteria or three choices that you can make when studying open access. There are better ones, there are more recent ones, there are more comprehensive ones, and these are two which I would recommend anyone interested in open access publishing to read. One is the ebook by Walt Crawford, where he, just as I, have looked at a lot of individual journal web pages and documented things by hand in a very extensive book with lots of figures and tables to kind of satiate any interest in open access journal publishing. And then there's the other side of the coin, what's actually open on the web. So open access journal publishing is one thing, what journals provide on their website, but what's actually happening when you search on Google or Google Scholar or any other search engine is another thing entirely. And that's where I think this State of OA study is great at providing a very comprehensive view of what's actually retrievable on a kind of a bottom-up approach, looking at which articles are available on the web rather than looking at what the publishing models of journals are. And here again, the population of journals in Walt's study was DOAJ. He selected only the DOAJ as his bubble of journals, while again, the State of OA study selected Web of Science as well as Crossref DOIs. So the Crossref, all journals that have a DOI system in place. So these are all different flavors of open access studies that you can have a look at, and they have fairly different end results as well based on just the kind of population of journals that they selected and the research methods implemented. But then I'd like to highlight, this is not a marketing speech, I am not affiliated with Rode in any way, but I think it's criminally underrated when it comes as a kind of a data source for doing these types of studies. This kind of in-progress study that I showed you was my first foray into Rode and trying to use that in a sensible way. But I think there's very much more potential here in using kind of the full universe of known open access journals, as well as combining that with just general ISSN records for the full universe of journals, be them publishing with whatever model. So I think that is really the future or kind of the way to go if someone would embark on a study today, to really think about how Rode data can be a cornerstone in studies like this, providing the best kind of solid bubble of population and kind of the outer limits for a study like this. The benefits, if I take you on a sales pitch anyway, it's free, doesn't cost anyone anything. That's a great benefit to some competitors in the field. And it's reliable. Like many of these indexing services that ask for pretty hefty subscription fees are really bad at keeping track of ISSNs and mixing up EISSNs with ISSNs or just making a mess of it. So it's really comforting to have a backrest, the master records at hand for doing studies like this, to have some kind of a reference to go back to. It's comprehensive, that I think I already highlighted, but then Jean-Claude already mentioned it, that there is ongoing collaboration with the DOAJ as well to kind of harmonize the records so that there would be less mismatches and less out of sync ISSN and journal titles in both databases. So it's really a great resource for researchers, and it's something I'm definitely going to take a closer look at when I get another summer to look at journal websites. But there's a lot of potential, and I really want to highlight that. But we could move on to my summary here. What I want you to leave with is critical knowledge of open access studies, because they are flavored in different ways, depending on what is the population of journals, what has the method been to identify what is open access. Is it just whatever is downloadable from the web wherever, or does it have to have, for example, licenses attached or be incorporated into some kind of identifier scheme like DOI, for example? So there's a lot of methodological options, and in a perfect world, we would all agree what is the best way to go forward so that we could all collaborate on collecting data around journals. There's a lot of redundant work being done on, for example, collecting APC fees for journals. And in another perfect world, open access wouldn't be research. It would just be there. You would open a website to see a platform-like landscape view of what is available, how much is open, maybe even closed. Closed isn't even an option, but there should be automated, comprehensive web metrics that no one has to collect by hand or do detective work to figure out, is it 50%, is it 30%, who knows? I'll spend next summer doing it. It should just be automatic, and I think it would be a benefit for everyone also if there would be more interoperability between this discovery system, indexing systems, so that we could create web services that are comprehensive and also function in this drill down fashion, where you can look at output from different countries, output from different universities, disciplines, and click through resources from different parts of the world and kind of browse it that way. But that's basically it. You can take the last slide, and I'll thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Mikael. You can stay with us, and your check is ready, and you can collect it after the session. I think we won't take any question now. We will wait for Elizabeth and Mark to talk, and at the end after their presentations, we'll take some questions. Thank you.